Hey everyone, and welcome to Chef AJ Live. I'm your host, Chef AJ, and this is where I introduce you to amazing people like you who are doing great things in the world that I think you should know about. My guests today are a regular feature on Chef AJ Live. They try to come on at least once a month when they can. They're none other than the dynamic duo of Dr. Doug Lisle and Dr. Jen Howk, who are writing a long-awaited book together on self-esteem that we look forward to. They're the co-stars of the Beat Your Genes podcast that airs Wednesday night on Blog Talk, iTunes, Stitcher, all kinds of platforms at 8:30 p.m. Pacific time. They have a wonderful website together where they can each do private consultations. It's called esteemdynamics.com. And Dr. Jen also has a virtual village, which we can tell you about, where she has her own little fireside chat group that I'm a member of. It's really wonderful every Saturday where we can talk about things that we maybe can't talk about in an open forum like this. And they're here to answer your questions for priority. Please sign up for my mailing list. We don't spam you. We just tell you who's going to be on the show so you can write us back. And that's the best way to get your questions answered other than doing a personal consult, which I highly recommend. Please welcome back Dr. Doug Lisle and Dr. Jen Howk. Always great to see you.
Great to see you, AJ.
Yeah. Yay. It's awesome to be here.
All right. Well, so would it be all right if I asked you guys a brief question? I know I talk to you a lot, but I never really get to ask my own questions because there's so many. But this has been coming up a lot on the show. We live in a time now with a lot of inclusivity, sensitivity towards racial, sexual, and gender issues. And I notice this mostly in my acting classes that I take now on Zoom or even in person coming up. Studying acting for 40 years and you pay the money, you take the class, but now they send you these pages like the things you have to sign, like non-harassment, and that you've got to be sensitive with your language. And I understand that, and I'm willing to do it. And, now we don't call the guy or the gal or the guy that delivers your mail. We don't say mailman, we don't say stewardess or waitress. And I'm wondering why the medical profession hasn't caught up. I have a lot of doctors, medical doctors on the show. And when they're talking about their experience, they'll say, I'm a fellow of the American College of Cardiology. I'm a fellow of the American College of Lifestyle Medicine. And the male doctors don't seem to mind that term. But when I'm talking off camera with the female doctors, they don't particularly like the term fellow. And I'm wondering why in medicine that term is still being used, especially in this day and age.
Yeah. Well, Jen.
It's funny because I was trying to anticipate where that was going, like where you were kind of going to lead with it. And I didn't immediately land on fellow, didn't immediately. I'm pretty sensitized to the direction that language has changed like this, but I haven't. That's new to me. That's a new one. Yeah, I mean, I think Doug can chime in here, but you see this across every field. I started seeing this in academia, over a decade ago now. I started to see the sort of tendrils of critical thinking, critical theory, which started in the legal realm and has moved into the social sciences and the humanities and now into kind of the culture at large. And a lot of that is a long time coming and, well-deserved representation across a lot of fields where people have been marginalized. And in my opinion, a lot of it is a little bit performative and excessive, and people are finding things to complain about because we generally live in a world where there's not as much to complain about as maybe other generations have experienced. And so I think it's a little of column A, little of column B. As for the specific question around fellow, I just haven't heard any discussion in medical circles or the circles that we run in general of that being a concern. But I guess it doesn't surprise me, given what I know of what academia is like these days, that would come up as part of a conversation. I was very proud to call myself a fellow when I was one a couple of times. That was a real term that designated something meritocratic and important. And I never once thought of it in a gendered way, but I'm not surprised to hear that that's happening now. So,
well, you never hear anybody saying, for she's a jolly good fellow, do you?
I can't say that I have. So maybe it's not the most inclusive term. What do they prefer we use instead? If it's a fellowship,
that I don't know, but it'll be interesting to see that when I talk to doctors, in groups, they don't always say the truth. But when I've talked to female doctors, they go, I don't really love that term. But the male doctors are like, oh, yeah, no, it doesn't mean this. But the first two definitions in Webster's Merriam are gender specific. Like in actors, they call male and female actors and actresses, they're all actors.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that happened a long time ago. I remember that happened even when I was involved in high school theater 20 years ago. So yeah, I don't know. Doug, do you have any other thoughts on this?
No.
I think of the Fellowship of the Ring too,
Yes.
sort of the Lord of the Rings. Like there were women in the Fellowship. There were, there was sort of, it was never part of this. It never fell under this broad gender critique that we see. But
Well,
what are
I
you
mean,
gonna do?
if you have to call people they when there's only one of them, I don't see why this can't change too. This makes more sense to me. I never understood how you can be a they when you're only one person.
Well, that's about neutrality. I think that's about people who are not identifying as either male or female. And so they're most comfortable with sort of an ambiguous term. Sometimes they, sometimes a completely different pronoun entirely. So that's a whole other conversation.
Yeah, I don't even know what a pronoun is. So on to the next challenging question. All right, so this first question is from Rhonda. I attended the NHA conference and saw your wonderful talk, meaning Dr. Hawk's talk, Hawk Talk, wow, and about moderation. It was wonderful. But immediately after, Dr. Joel Fuhrman gave the exact opposite point of view. I found it very confusing. How do we know who is right and who we should listen to? He said, food addiction is tremendously powerful, and the insidious damage from the way these foods are designed to hook people like drugs is horrible. And the only way to break the illicit love affair with these substances is with enforced abstinence. I just want to make it clear that this idea of baby steps in the right direction or a cheat diet where you go on and off healthy eating inevitably leads people to failing and is the trigger. The inability for people to adopt this 100% creates the difficulty, the reason that people are failing, because they never transition their taste buds and never get the ability to enjoy the food as much, as they're always in a position of stress having to make a decision. You need to find a way to set up your life where you're not going to keep going back and forth between eating healthfully and unhealthfully. Continued exposure, even in small amounts, are addictive triggers that derail your ability to do this consistently and healthfully. The dabbling of going back and forth adds so much stress to your life, keeping you in constant stress and constant fear, and is the reason for your health demise. It's so much easier when you commit to doing it 100% and jump in with both feet. Thoughts?
Oh, goodness, where to begin? So the reason I gave the talk at the NHA that I did, it was, first of all, I really tried to make it very clear during the talk. Several times I kind of stopped and said, don't misunderstand me here. Let me make my message really clear. This is not a moderation message. I was really not trying to tell people to have a weekly cheat day or to plan on cheating at all. I was going again and again to the importance of doing the best job that you possibly can for any number of reasons. I mean, Doug and I have talked about this a bunch of times. It's really important for your self-esteem process, your internal audience, all of these kind of processes that happen psychologically where you need to observe yourself doing the best you can. And if you're sort of planning to fail, you're likely to fail to some degree. I was coming at it, the reason that I wanted to present that alternative perspective was one, not of you should plan to embrace moderation, but that moderation is going to happen for most people, that most people, it's wonderful to strive for perfection. The reality is that very few people can pull off perfection indefinitely for the rest of their lives. Most people who have been in and around this plant-based world or any kind of dietary compliance world at all, they struggle. They have periods of time where they're super, super compliant and it's all really easy and they're doing really well. And then they have other periods of time where it's not as easy. They're not as compliant. They're having a lot of trouble getting back on track. So what kind of message are we trying to give to those people? That was who I was talking to. I was trying to say it is not the end of the world if you have gone off plan here. All you need to do is course correct. That was the kind of the general overview that I had. The gist of the talk, it's not the exact talk that I gave, but it's the script and I re-recorded it. It's on a video that I'll be putting out for my Patreon folks probably today or tomorrow. So if people really want to hear it for themselves and missed it at the NHA, they can hear it that way too. So the message is we are all imperfect for all of these reasons of how the pleasure trap operates, how different personalities operate. It does not make you a less valuable or worthy person if you haven't managed to be perfectly compliant. Of course, it's easier if you never go off plan. Of course, it's easier if you don't give in to temptation. Of course, it's easier if you neuroadapt and don't put yourself into this back and forth position that people will do. That's great if you can do it, but not everybody can do it. And it doesn't mean that you are a disaster or a failure or that you have to be ashamed or anything at all other than you just have to get back up and keep going. So that was the message. I don't think that Dr. Fuhrman could disagree with that. So it's interesting that he would come on and sort of disavow me in that way.
Great. Dr. Lisle, do you want to add anything to that? Because we actually have 2 follow-up questions on moderation versus abstinence as just a coincidence.
Well, I could add a lot. It's kind of like if you sort of attack my position, I'll defend myself. But if you attack my best friend here, you're going to get blasted. Yeah. As the author, the principal author of The Pleasure Trap, what Dr. Furman says there, if that's a direct quote, is that a direct quote?
Yes, she actually did a correct quote, direct quote from his talk.
Very intelligent thinking. It is reminiscent of the thinking that comes out of Alan Goldhammer's mouth, which had a big influence on the way The Pleasure Trap was written. And you can see that I filed it down a bit when we were writing, because I was already aware of something that would take me many years to actually formally crystallize. And that is and you see me, actually one of the reasons Jen and I are Jen and I at this point is because of a single note that I put in the back of The Pleasure Trap, a paragraph. It was a miracle, because it's a message in a bottle that happens to now reach my my lifetime colleague now about a thing that I termed the ego trap. And my little discussion that was in a footnote in The Pleasure Trap, Jen read it and said, wow, that is something very important. And it stuck in her mind, and therefore she was willing to listen to some of my other things that I had to say about life that she didn't agree with. Well, very fortunately. What that commentary that we just heard from Dr. Furman, which is, like I said, it's not inconsistent with the message that we would have read 18 years ago as The Pleasure Trap was published, or that you would hear from Alan. But it is, in fact, has a naivete and has an obtuseness to the thinking there that misses out the fact that there is an opponent process between the ego trap and the pleasure trap. Okay, so in other words, think of it as the following. Think of you as looking to jump over a high bar. If anybody ever had to do the high jump in junior high school, there's a feeling that if it's so low, then there's no improvement in your skill. There's no challenge, and therefore you're not going to accomplish anything. That's intuitive eating. Intuitive eating is eat whatever you want, just eat what you feel, and then that's going to help you. Well, intuitive eating success is exactly zero. Now, it's not zero psychologically, because people actually amazingly feel a little bit better about themselves. They set the bar so low and they manage to accomplish a nothing, absolutely nothing, but somehow if they will at least self-report that they feel slightly better about themselves, even though they have no success at all. So I don't think that that's really the right way to goal set. Here's the other way not to goal set. Don't put the high bar up at 6 feet when I look at that thing and I feel like there's no way I can go over it. Okay. If you put the bar up there, guess what? If you say, well, that's how you learn how to high jump, Doug, well, then I will never high jump. Okay. You say, okay, well, guess what? We'll put it down to 4 feet. I go up to 4 feet and I'm not even close getting over the bar. How excited am I going to be about high jumping now? The answer is, I've high jumped for my last time. I won't be back. Okay. That's the ego trap. And if you say, oh, but you're supposed to, that's how you do it. In fact, that's the only way to do it. It's like, well, guess what? I won't try that sport. I'll walk away and I'll just quit. Because you've just humiliated me by putting the bar up so high that there is no honor and no utility in giving my best effort and lowering the bar down to a level where I can do it. Those two things in this particular case, this is a particular case in addictive process where these two processes are working in direct opposition. If we get it too low, the person remains in the pleasure trap. If we get it too high, they're in the ego trap and they quit. Okay. The correct understanding. Okay. So it's not a debate. I have no interest in debating people that don't understand enough about psychology to be qualified to be giving an opinion. okay? The truth of the matter is these are direct opponent processes, and you have to thread the needle. Jen's talk was a highly intelligent, experienced discussion about how it is to thread the needle between those two opponent forces, okay? Any other opinion on this is ignorant and mistaken and wrong and potentially dangerous, okay? So no, the correct way to look about this is that the ego trap and the pleasure trap both must be respected. And when we are giving advice to people who are struggling with this, we have to look at them as individuals. Okay, we have to understand their personal individual capability, just as if we were a coach trying to help somebody learn how to high jump. Okay, so some people we put it at 2 feet, some people we could put it at 3 feet. A remarkable athlete, we could put it at 4 feet. Okay, but in every case, people have their limits, and to put the limit at 100% compliance for perfection for the rest of your life is insanity. Okay, so let me tell you further why it is that is flat out wrong. Because I have been involved with thousands upon thousands of people who have succeeded to varying degrees by adopting the McDougall program and have lost 30 pounds, have gotten off their medications. But would they like to lose another 30? Sure. Are they partially in the pleasure trap still? Yes, they are. Is their life better, and will they live longer and happier as a result of the efforts that they are making? Absolutely, without any doubt. Okay? So this is in no way is an all or nothing message, responsible, intelligent, or accurate. Okay? So that's my statement, and that's the kind of talk you get out of me when you slap my friend.
Okay, and I can totally see your point, and there are actually, believe it or not, 2 questions that just are similar to this, because the problem that, for example, this health coach named Hallie says, how do you get someone out of the ego trap without sending that back into the pleasure trap in reference to food addiction for very open, agreeable, and not highly conscientious personality types? How much leeway can they safely have before they will find themselves battling the addiction again because of the binging and craving? So that seems to be the problem with the balancing of it, because like you said, you've had people get off their medication and be healthier, but the people that are really trying to be very lean, they can't always do it with the little cheats here and there.
Let's get some statistics in here so we understand what it is that we're actually dealing with.
Time for some parameters.
Yeah, parameters. Okay. So let's understand that according to, I believe, the American Heart Association, 20 years ago, 1 in 2,000 Americans was following a heart healthy diet. 20 years later, it's 1 in 3,500. Okay, so if anybody has any wild guesses as to how difficult this is to make any significant positive change, I think that 1 in 2,000 to 1 in 3,000 is a pretty good way of estimating what it is that you're up against. This would explain Dr. Furman's consternation and frustration. In other words, if you're a doctor that's fighting this, you feel like, well, there's got to be one damn solution, and that solution is you just got to be perfect. Okay, I understand why he thinks the way he thinks. That's exactly how Alan Goldhammer thinks. Okay, but they also don't understand the nature of the ego trap. Being the individuals that they are not particularly psychologically minded, nor do they do any kind of psychotherapy, nor have they actually thought through the nature of this problem. And so they don't actually understand there's a twin-headed monster and they're only trying to attack one side of it. Okay, so the problem is very difficult. And the question that your person is asking is a very good question. And the answer is embedded in the answer that I said before. That is that every single case is different. And it is not the case that we would expect that most people would ever be able to have any substantial effect here. I wouldn't expect that that would be true. We are asking, the whole point of writing The Pleasure Trap was to explain that this is not in any way a personal failing, that in fact, what we're asking, I call it the hidden force that undermines health and happiness. the pleasure trap. Those two words should hit you. Pleasure trap. One of them gives you a nice warm feeling of something that's drawing you in. The second word is like, uh-oh, I've been deceived and I'm in trouble and I may be dead. That is exactly why that title is the way it is. So we do not expect people to manage this. Even with considerable effort, we would expect that most personalities would not have either the circumstances or the genetic chops to take it on. Is it possible for some people? Yes, and you've heard me say this 100 times. Unusually motivated, unusual personalities. Okay, that's what you get when you have a thing called the American Heart Association, whose guidelines are very loose, reporting to you that their sum total impact on America is 0. Okay, so
less than 0.
The answer to the question is nobody could possibly know, including you and your client, even with considerable experience. So what you must do is you must run experiments. Okay, you run experiments as intelligently as you can figure out how, and then you hope for the best. That's what I've been doing for 25 years.
And you expect that it's going to ebb and flow. So I think this is one big piece that people just can't accept is true for most people, or they want to be the exception to this. But for most people, even if you do have this kind of unusual motivation, unusual personality that Doug is talking about, you're talking about a marathon of life where you're going to have periods where you're really on it, and then you're going to have periods where you're not so on it. And I think this is universal. I mean, I came to this talk and framing it the way I did from personal experience and from talking to so many clients who have had this over and over and over again. And one of the ways I called the talk Rethinking the Pleasure Trap, or Reimagining the Pleasure Trap, because getting out of the pleasure trap is this hidden force that undermines health and happiness. But aiming too high, setting yourself into this ego trap and feeling all of the shame and all of the guilt and all of the misery and all of the unworthiness and the like, oh, I'm just gonna, not even participate in the world, and I'm not a full person until I get back to it, until I'm back on plan, until I'm back in the groove. This is BS. Like, you're the same human. You're just going through a different phase where this is not working as well. And you still know how to do it. You're just not always able to apply it for any number of reasons. And so I believe in evidence-based medicine. I also believe in reality-based medicine and reality-based psychology. And that's what we're really trying to do here, is just take people as individuals and meet them where they are and try to go from there, rather than holding yourself to some universal standard that some people are able to achieve under either very unusual personalities or great duress or both. And it's just a terrible thing to set yourself up against, to make that the standard for your worth as a human.
I can be like Goldhammer and Furman, but I don't tell people that they have to be that. I've always said, do the least restrictive plan that you can do, but that will get you the results you seek. But sometimes a more liberal approach doesn't always get them to where they say they want to be. Does that make sense?
Sure. Very true, AJ. I couldn't agree more with that. I think that you have that philosophy is 100% consistent with the way I think, and it seems completely reasonable. And so that's why you have to learn by doing. You don't run until you can walk, and you don't walk until you crawl, and you don't crawl until you've been around a little bit. So the truth is, it's a process. And we don't go from 0 to 100 in most cases. And as Jen is pointing out, as people have known, she's talked about her history with the addictive process, that this is a wandering odyssey, that you can expect a learning curve associated with something so difficult. And anybody that's struggling in the middle of this should in no way declare that, I either have to be perfect or not, or I just quit. I just had one of those. I just had one of those this week. And the lady was so relieved when she heard on the other end of the phone that I was not being judgmental, nor was I laying down the law that, because she had done very well for a few months and then she had backslid. It's like, yeah, that is exactly how it is that we would expect something like this to go. So now she's inspired because a big part of the inspiration was the feedback that no, you're not fundamentally flawed, and you've actually done pretty well. And so you've got a lot of pieces in place here. We're just going to now aim for doing a little bit better and see what we can learn. That's all. Learning curve.
You know, I'm abstinent, but I don't think a lot of people realize, but those of us that can do it, it's not hard for us. If it was hard for me every single day, I couldn't do it. But maybe it's my personality, but also my environment is set up that way. And I don't think it's hard for Dr. Goldhammer. Those of us that can pull it off, it's pretty easy for us.
He lives inside a salad bar. I mean, you can't get a more optimal environment. And I think part of what gets people too is that, this is a very universal experience with people I talk to. It's not hard when you're in the groove. This is very common for people to be doing really well. And they have this kind of moment where they start to get arrogant, like, what was the big deal? Like, this is the easiest thing in the world. Why isn't everybody doing this? And they forget that they're walking this really narrow path. And how easy it is to fall off. This is the metaphor of the narrow path through the very shallow water, that you're very likely to stumble and find yourself ankle deep in that water, but you're only ankle deep. You can always get back on the path. It's just a very narrow, perilous little path. And it's easy to get overconfident and think, oh, I've got this, like I have this dialed in, I'm never going to struggle with this again. And then so when you find yourself you kind of on the other side of that, maybe the second time, the third time, the seventh time, that really starts to do a number on your psychology, and you do start to feel like there's something wrong with you. This is what I call the I know what to do, why can't I just do it cycle. And this kind of messaging that comes from these saints of purity is really can be really detrimental to people when they're holding themselves to that standard. And it does contribute to feeling like, well, screw it. I guess I can't do it. I guess there really is something wrong with me. So I just might as well give up. And that's not you're walking this narrow path where you're going to stumble a lot. It's going to work sometimes better than it is other times. And this is life. This is the ebb and flow of life. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with you.
Right. I always say you're always one bite away from either falling in the ditch or getting back out.
Yeah. And I will tell people, and I said at the NHA, I am going on 8 years sober from alcohol, and the pleasure trap's harder. Pleasure trap's way harder because you're navigating this terrain in a confrontational way every single day. You're just using so much more bandwidth to make good choices or optimized choices. And you're navigating this food environment that is constantly trying to lure you back in with variety, with abundance. I mean, even if you're eating a whole plant-based diet, there's a lot of little, quasi early triggers in there that can start to suck you into other processes. So, and it's progress. It's people will, this is the relapse as part of recovery idea. And as you go through this throughout the course of your life, the relapse becomes less detrimental. It's usually shorter in duration when it comes to getting back into pleasure trap food. But most people should expect that it's going to happen from time to time. It's going to happen because they got out of the groove because of life circumstances. A quarantine happened, a family member died, something has interfered in their usual routine, and it's going to disrupt them, and it's going to take some time and effort to get back to where they were. There's nothing fundamentally wrong with them for going to low-hanging dopamine when things got a little rough, or for any other reason.
I think it's an important conversation. We should have this talk from time to time because people need to be reminded. Dr. Lisle, Dr. Goldhammer often teases you about your carrot cake indiscretions and that he's going to live longer because you don't eat as perfectly as he does. But if you wanted to, could you? I mean, not that you would need to, but like, would it be hard for you to do an Allen diet for whatever reason you were?
Well, put it this way. Let's suppose that I was given a serious cancer diagnosis. Okay. Then the day that happens, then I would be eating like Furman and Goldhammer, okay? But when I look at the statistics on that, there's no evidence that it would help me. There's just a mythical theory that it might, okay? So in other words, the difference between what it is that I do and what it is that they do, there's really no evidence under the sun that there would be any appreciable difference at all. However, is it in theory, is it consistent that there might be some small advantage? Yeah, might be a very infinitesimally small advantage. I can tell you, we're now 40 years into this, and I can still whip Alan at basketball. And I can also say he has not closed the distance. All right. So far, so good.
Nice. Well, thank you. So we're going to switch gears, get away from the pleasure trap and the ego trap. And I find this question from Josh, I don't know if you've ever answered something like this, kind of interesting and rather poignant, because I knew someone actually in this situation. He asks, in terms of overall life happiness and self-esteem, is it better to be a has-been or a never was? And I actually knew, I don't want to say the name because you might know this person, but a person who was quite famous.
Great question.
I know, I love it too, because I knew somebody that was very famous at one point in their life in a entertainment capacity, very, very famous. And then they weren't, and they had to take like a regular job, like at an establishment where you could see them. And some people recognized this individual, and they did not seem very happy when they were recognized and would look down. And I always wondered, like, is it better to have loved and lost or never to have loved at all?
I think it's better to be a never was, but Doug can chime in.
Yeah, I actually can remember exactly that situation. That and my wheels are already spinning about how it is to what the accuracy is of that, and we can immediately talk about, well, how long were you somebody, and then how long are you not somebody, and how often is it recognized, and how much money did you make when you were somebody that you still get to live off of? And what's your personality with respect to the whole thing? In other words, all of these things are part of it, including if you were a never was, are you a narcissist that's incredibly pissed off your whole life because you never got your day in the sun? So the question cannot be answered as a blank check. It is completely and utterly individual. However, it's a hilarious and entertaining question because it's one that we never thought. It's great. Yeah. It's a great question.
Definitely the clients I talk to who are has-beens have a harder psychological time than the never was's. We have some never was exceptions who are miserable with their never wasness, but they are sort of entitled narcissistic types.
Right.
And so it's not like they've been, it's not a laboring earnestly in obscurity and just never being recognized in the same sort of way that we would classically think about it. But the has-beens, there's this real sort of, I had it and I lost it. I squandered it and I can't get it back because the circumstances aren't the same. And I'm not as young as I was, and I'm not as hot as I was. And it really gets to people. So just looking kind of at the numbers, I have a lot more has-beens struggling than never was's.
Yeah.
But they might be overrepresented in the people I talk to too.
I just remember reading an interview with George Papard. And towards this was obviously Breakfast with Tiffany's, big actor, handsome guy, and then he was in trouble, like financially, professionally, and everything else, as he was probably approaching, his 60 years old, and he was right up against it, planning he was going to have to do dinner theater, which is huge
brutal.
Breakfast at Tiffany's, let me tell you. And then he got the call and got the A-team, and it just completely resurrected his entire life, career, finances, and everything. So like your one phone, it could have been James Coburn. Sorry about that, for mistakes. Apparently James Coburn was being considered, and the two of them highly similar. You know what I mean? Both outstanding, perfect. They'd be well casted, either one of them. But they, flip the coin, and now we're the A-team instead of dinner theater. Such is Hollywood.
Let's call.
I think it's harder if you think about that. Has been. What do we mean by that? Like, what is the entire socioeconomic status length of the fall? You know what I'm saying? And that. For some people, it could be stunning, and for some people, it might be, well, I was here, now I'm here. I still got quite a bit of status, but not nearly as much as I had before. Yeah, every retired NBA All-Star has to put up a bat.
But sort of like Gary Coleman, the actor that was on Different Strokes, ended up like being a security guard. That would be like an example in some people's eyes of a fall from grace. But with, this is a very funny comment from Jessie. She says, I'm an overachiever. I'm a has-been and a never was. But I think about if you're a never was, there's still hope, because think about Grandma Moses didn't start painting until she was 90. Ruth Clara Peller that got that Where's the Beef commercial in her 80s. Ruth Gordon won an Oscar in her 80s. So I feel like if you're a never was, that doesn't mean you're not a never will be.
Yes.
That's my general intuition. I think even if you are, you can be either of these, as long as you get yourself back into, the solution for both to sort of restore happiness and order to your nervous system is the same. And it's to get realistic about your expectations and to get yourself in an improvement process toward improving your station in life and moving toward a realistic goal. And so both of those people, no matter what the scenario, it's that we actually are going to get them happier, putting them on the same sort of path. I think the never was is more naturally inclined to find that because they do still have the hope and the optimism. So they're more likely to be out there grinding away, hoping to be discovered, than the has been, who is more likely to be cynical and in an ego trap about it. But that doesn't mean that you can't have both of those effects on either side. So
beautiful.
Like I could have been a contender. Okay, now switching gears, we have a question from Cheryl on sleep. Is being a night owl or a morning bird truly genetic? How do you convince the loved one about the importance of sleep when they're a night owl who refuses to wind down at night until after midnight, spending time watching news or sports or doing puzzles, then finally gets to bed at 1 or 2 a.m. and has to get up at 7 for work? Is there anything a spouse can do to inspire him to recognize and acknowledge the importance of sleep and get him to change? I'm worried about his brain and later cognitive decline.
I'll let the resident night owl answer this.
I don't know that there's any convincing of anything. The person obviously has a kind of a job that they can manage to down a cup of coffee and get through the thing. And they're almost certainly not working a job that requires any major muscular effort. If they did, they wouldn't be staying up till 12 or 1 o'clock. So the guys that are out there building brick walls and are framing houses, these guys aren't staying up till midnight. So we've got a white collar type of a person that all they have to do is sit in a chair with one eye open. They've probably been doing the job for a long time, so that they can do it half conscious. And that's probably what's going on. And that individual is just running a cost benefit analysis. They're getting just enough sleep to sort of get by and function, and that's good enough for them. I would say possibly I don't think that there's any convincing them of anything. The information is the cause of change. New information is the cause of change. That's not likely to be in a printed book for a question like this. It's more likely to be experiential. And so I would say going to some remote cabin for a 4-day weekend sometime or a 3-day weekend sometime where there isn't any TV and isn't any Wi-Fi. And so, we wind down and what we have is conversation and maybe a book. And at that point, it's not that stimulating. Keep your eyes open, particularly an individual like that is chronically sleep deprived. And they get to bed at 10 and then they wake up at 7 after 9 hours of sleep and they feel better than they felt in months. So an experiential process would be the best way to try to feed that concept into somebody's nervous system.
Great. All right. Well, we come back to food, always do, from Susan. This time, what is the difference between food addiction and binge eating? Is it important to understand to accomplish or maintain weight loss?
Feel free, Jen.
Well, I feel like you've probably spoken on this before in a more eloquent way. I think that the binge eating is a behavior, food addiction is substance dependent. So you're not when you're talking about the continuum of addictive substances, you can imagine a line where you start off with things that are not at all addictive, i.e. whole natural food. Nobody is binging on broccoli. And if you are, congratulations, keep at it. That's a good life choice. But no one's binging on whole plant foods for the most part. We've all heard stories of people who say that they can binge on potatoes, et cetera. That's kind of a different conversation. We might get there, but in general, whole natural foods, whole natural plant foods, you're not binging on those because they don't have addictive properties. As you move up the continuum of addictive property, like any kind of substance, it becomes more unnatural. So you start to dehydrate those foods. You take a potato and you put it in the air fryer. You turn it into hash browns, nice crispy hash browns. You start adding flavorings to things. You're making it more addictive, even though it's still recognizable as a whole natural food. Air fried hash brown potatoes with oil-free, sugar-free ketchup, that's much more kind of concentrated and has more addictive properties than the original potato that you find dug out of the ground. And you just keep moving up and you start to get to all of these chemicals and substances that are extracted, really unnatural representations of what they originally were. So you get to caffeine, you get to nicotine, you get to alcohol, you get to all of the other drugs, and they get progressively more addictive as they are less representative of something that you would find in nature. For the most part, we can all think of some exceptions that we could, magic mushrooms that we can throw out there. But that's generally how it works. So you're not in the food realm, you're just not going to binge on something unless it has that sort of addictive hold on you. So the food addiction is really just binging on these foods that have been processed beyond the body's ability to regulate them in a normal way. And that's going to vary tremendously from individual to individual. Everybody has different trigger foods. Everybody has different points at which certain things have addictive properties and others don't. Some people can have a very responsible relationship to chocolate donuts, but not to chips and salsa. Some people can try cocaine and not be interested in it at all, but they're gone the first time they try heroin. So these are individual circuits. It's individual brains that are responding to substances in different ways. This is all about the environment. And again, kind of just course correcting. If you find yourself getting sucked into some kind of supernormal, unnatural food situation that you're binging on, then there's only one thing to do, which is to correct it. It's today, can you do better? Can you get it out of your environment? Can you do your best today? And maybe you'll be successful and maybe you won't, but the remedy is the same. All you can do is to try to do your best today. If you don't do your best, you try again tomorrow. If you do your best, that's great. Your self-esteem is going to thank you for it. But either way, you've tried your best. Either way, you've course corrected. And you're going to just do that as many times as you have to continue on your journey of life.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you. There are some questions in the chat about anorexia, and Dr. Lisle, I believe, and Dr. Howk probably as well, refers to Dr. Sean Geisinger for anorexia, correct? Mm-hmm. And she will be a guest on the show this Saturday at 11. So come with all your anorexia.
Oh, awesome. That's great.
Yeah, I haven't met her, but I've talked to her on the phone. She seems very nice and regards you guys very highly. Okay, so we have two more previously submitted questions. One is from Shiva. Is there something in human evolution genes that explain why many fear events that are unlikely to happen, for example, death by COVID-19 in young people, more than they fear more probable events, for example, accidents, injuries, cancer, or other diseases? How can people beat their genes to reduce their fear? And I sent you guys an article recently about how they're recommending kids under the age of 12 are getting to get the COVID vaccine now because of the variant, because some are actually being put on ventilators. So maybe you can talk about fear in general.
Well, what all behavior is. So all experiences, the way your brain is going to work. These are all part and parcel of, they're all derivatives of cost-benefit analysis. So your mind is designed as an extraordinarily sophisticated accountant. And what it does is it actually decides even what it's going to spend time running a cost-benefit analysis on. Okay, it's part of the cost-benefit analytics that it does. So when people, quote, can't let something go, or something's bothering them, or they've got a memory from 30 years ago that they keep cycling around. That's because the brain is estimating that it's worth the mental energy to keep cycling around it because it feels like there's something important for it to still learn. So when it comes to fearing anything, anxiety, whatever we want to call this feeling, it's a feeling that we could be facing a loss. That's all it is. So the ultimate loss would be life, either yours or someone important to you. So that's going to be a cause of a lot of fear. It can also be a fear of the IRS, for goodness sakes. If a surprise little thing comes in your mailbox, it's like, what's that? That can't be a good thing. So anxiety, fear, etc., is nothing other than the result of your mind running cost-benefit analysis and on environmental inputs and basically saying, this looks like it could be dangerous. And anxiety or fear is a reaction to tell you that there appears to be enough threat that it's going to be worth the energy to organize an avoidance strategy. That's all it is. Okay. So whether it's COVID-19 or it's the Loch Ness monster, doesn't really make any difference. Every individual brain simply analyzes the evidence as best it can, as accurately as it can possibly figure out how to do it. It analyzes that evidence and it will result in a feeling. That feeling, incidentally, doesn't have to be permanent. It should not be permanent. It should change with the evidence. Okay. So as new evidence comes in, when I was 5 years old and I would see a floppy-eared dog, running towards me that was, 15 pounds, I might have been afraid of it. Okay. So now that I'm 4 times bigger and 10 times older, now I'm not afraid of it. So it depends on what that dog looks like and et cetera. And then who it is that's walking the dog. In other words, my brain is more sophisticated at making that cost-benefit analysis now than it was before. So something like COVID is very scary. There's a tremendous amount of press about it. An awful lot of people experience a great deal of anxiety. Many people have died from this. So when we hear all this information, the typical human brain is very much attempting to try to do what? Trying to do a cost-benefit analysis. Okay. So a 10-year-old child has no possible way of running a cost-benefit analysis that has any mathematical sophistication to the problem at all. So as a result, what they're going to do is they're going to rely on trusted adults. So they're going to look to what it is that their parents seem to think, and they're feeling. They're simply going to be the way animals work is they don't just run their own cost-benefit analysis. They will also look at what we call conspecifics. In other words, other members of your species. Those are going to be the most useful informative sources. The better yet would be trusted members of your species. Okay, that would be even more important. This morning I was outside with my cat that likes to patrol the outside, and the big garbage truck came along to pick up the stuff. Now that cat, I was watching carefully, that cat was very afraid. And I walked towards the front door. He walked with me, and he was trying to read me. Okay, he was trying to figure out, is Dad actually anxious or is Dad fine? And when we got a little bit of shelter, and it did not appear that I was in any anxiety at all, then I could see his anxiety drop by 75% within that 6 or 8 seconds. Okay. So that makes sense. Even though the truck was getting closer and the noise was louder, that cat has a computer checking algorithm in it that it's going to look around and see what the other guys think. Okay, so that's what's going on with COVID and vaccines and 12-year-olds being pitched. Of course, there's remember, whenever anything is a value proposition is being pitched, the only reason somebody's offering you something is that they're getting something in return. Somebody somewhere is getting something in return if you're getting a vaccine shot. So it may be free to you, but it wasn't free. Somebody's making money off of it. So there's reasons, not just in this arena, but in all arenas, for the use of deception to basically alter people's cost-benefit analysis so that they'll do things like buy a used car with a bad transmission, buy swampland in Florida that's supposed to have great promise. There's also honesty in advertisement that people, well-meaning and straightforward, are telling you these are organically grown grapes, and they in fact are, and it's a straightforward, legitimate value for value trade. So deception and misinformation and miscalibration potentially lead to mistakes in running the cost-benefit analysis on any value proposition. That is inevitable. So it's no surprise to me that we've got little people, very anxious about their survival, about something that has got a tremendous amount of press and a great deal of adult consternation, legitimately. But to my way of thinking about my look at the evidence, I look at that and say, why on earth would I ever vaccinate a 12-year-old child? The evidence to date at this moment would tell me that the cost benefit on that is very uncertain and clearly not. I'll tell you what it is. And I don't know what it is, but I can tell you what it is not. The cost benefit analysis on that question is not known. Okay. That is an unknown cost benefit analysis. And so my attitude towards this would be, I would not be doing that until I know. When I know, and I've had appropriate amount of science and appropriate amount of data analytics can tell me that it is in the best interest of my 12-year-old to get it, then I would tell them to get it. But until I know that, I'm not telling them anything of the kind.
Any thoughts about that, Dr. Howk?
No, I think that's a beautiful summary. We've talked quite a lot. If people are interested in more on this, we talk about this on my show Howk Blocked, which is on my Patreon channel. And sometimes if it is published publicly, if not on YouTube, then on my Odyssey channel, which is kind of a too hot for YouTube sort of space. So people can find that. That's all linked from my website, which is just jenhawk.com.
Thank you. And we have one more submitted question. Guys, get on the mailing list. That's how you get top priority. And this is from a different Susan. If personality types are determined by genes instead of environmental differences, how do we explain the negative impact on the personality of a child who has experienced abuse and deprivation in their environment?
I don't know. How do you feel, Jen? You're either way.
Yeah, you can go ahead and start on it, and I can jump in.
Yes, this is kind of one of these questions that assumes facts that are not in evidence. Okay, so when you're an attorney, you know in a court of law to be looking for exactly this kind of question, and that's what you say to the judge. You say objection. The question assumes facts not in evidence. No, there are no such facts in evidence. So the person believes there are such facts and evidence because they've been published. They've been published in apparently legitimate sources like World Health Organization, spending a bunch of money to examine effects of the correlations of ACE scores with lifetime problems, et cetera. All of the research that you believe that you are seeing such a connection has been done without controlling for the influence of the very genetics that I talk about and Jen talks about and Robert Plomin talks about. So we don't know actually if we're talking about extremely rare levels of abuse that would happen early in life that would damage the brain. For example, that is a different issue. The curious issue that we're really talking about here is not physical damage to the brain. We're actually speculating about informational inputs. So the question is, can informational inputs, i.e. screaming at you and telling you that you're ugly, beating you physically, but not actually damaging your brain. So that would be an informational input. So could there be informational inputs that would negatively alter the person's adult personality? I do not believe that there's any evidence that credibly indicates that that is true. So I believe that human beings are inherently resilient in that way. And let me explain to you briefly why it is. First of all, like I said, there's no evidence to support it, despite a phenomenal amount of energy that has been put in by social science in the last half a century to try to find the ways that personality can be altered as a result of parenting styles, parenting practices, punishments, rewards, situational forces, etc. They have bowled a perfect zero in 50 years and tens of thousands of studies and thousands of NIH grants and National Science Foundation and entire careers of the majority of developmental social psychologists and childhood clinical psychologists in the United States and around the world. They have exactly zero evidence to support that position. Let me explain why it is that I never expect to find any substantive evidence. The reason is the nature of memory and the nature of the purpose of memory. So in just a few minutes, let me lay this out. Your mind is designed to take in information from the environment and to be running a cost-benefit analysis on what that means. So if that big dog with pointy ears and snarling demeanor starts chasing me right now, I know what that means. That's dangerous, okay? If I walk into my kitchen, I smell something fabulous cooking, I know what that means. So my emotional reactions are the result of an analysis of what these environmental inputs mean for me, okay? That's what it is. My friend, when I saw Jen's face, when we just booted up, I had a very pleasant internal experience. There's my friend, there's my colleague. It's like, it's a wonderful thing for me to see Jen. Sometimes we talk on the phone, but when I see her, I have this thing that I know that's a valuable, important, and positive input for me. Okay. Now, before I knew her, that wouldn't have been true. But now that I do know her, what's happening? What's happening is that's a little different than smelling something in the kitchen, because that's a direct result immediately into the brain that didn't require any memory system at all. But in order for me to have that reaction to Jen, that's a memory system. So so your memory system improves your ability to make direct sensory evidence from the environment and turn it into accurate analysis. So if you're a rabbit looking at a meadow, you see opportunity out there because you can see the grass and you can smell. You may be able to smell some carrots, okay? And you can't smell any predators. So the direct evidence tells you that it's telling you where to go for the carrots and that it appears to be safe. But if you had for 7 times in the last 7 mornings, you had woken up to the same scene, except half an hour later, a fox had appeared, crouching behind the bushes and had almost run you into the ground and gotten you. If that had happened, then when you wake up this morning, you don't just see this scene and have a direct sensory input. You have a memory system that tells you the scene that you're seeing may not be accurate and right. Okay? And so what happens is memory is an improvement about your ability to assess the environment. But I think that you can understand how critically important. So the rabbit no longer has the peaceful sense that it did before it ever saw the fox in that environment. It now is more wary, okay? But you can imagine if it sees the fox 7 days in a row, and then for the next 2 years, it does not see the fox. We can see that its memory system must update. It shouldn't be as vigilant and afraid and wary and risk averse on day 300 past the fox than it is on day 3 since the last time it saw the fox. It doesn't do a memory system any good at all to have a memory get into it and not be modified by future experience. To have such an evolutionary program inside of an animal is evolutionarily suicidal. You could never have such a thing built, and such a things are not built into animal nervous systems. So therefore, when you have bad things happen to you, and you have an immediate sequelae that are a result, post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety attacks, whatever the heck it is, you expect those things to continue on for a period of time that is commensurate with the accurate cost-benefit analysis to whatever the threat was, whatever it is that you experienced as a loss, and the future stimulus characteristics in the environment that indicates that that is still present. So a child that is in an abusive environment is going to be cowering and in fear and in misery for all of the years that they're in front of the perpetrator and that they keep getting that action perpetrated. That is true, that is miserable, that's criminal, and that's bad. Will it influence their future personality? No, it will not, okay? It won't, because as soon as they're in a new environment and there's new evidence and new relationships and new patterns of behavior, all that's going to happen is that their life experience changes. Their perceived probability of those threats declines, as it should, relative to the stimulus characteristics. If you're still under communist Cuba and you're still getting your house shaken down and beaten up by the police, then you should never lose your anxiety about the regime. But if it turns out that you grow up and go away and get a job and get away from all the abuse, et cetera, then it should update. If it does not update, it's an incredibly dysfunctional design in evolution. So what the research evidence shows, very surprising to social developmental psychologists and clinical psychologists, and surprising to all of us, but actually it shouldn't be surprising in retrospect as we now understand the nature of the way the brain is organized. We would expect the system to update. And when we revisit that person 25 years after their abusive process, we should expect to see their native personality interacting with an environment that is no longer particularly threatening at all. And whatever that innate genetic personality was, should be the personality that we now see as they interact with their social environment. Will they have unpleasant memories? Yes. Will those memories influence them in any way? Well, only if the stimulus characteristics of the current situation give rise to it. Okay, so if they're a single mom and they meet some new guy and that new guy smells like and sounds like and loses his temper just like their abusive father did, they should have an anxiety reaction and a protective reaction that would be possibly more acute than somebody that had not had those experiences. But what influence does that have on how they play on their tennis team? Who their friends are now, where they like to go on vacation? Do they like to go to the snow or do they like to go to the sunshine? No, those experiences will have no such influence because it's not impacting their personality. It's just a part of a memory system that in general would decline in importance over time. And that's how it would work. And that is in fact consistent with all known evidence of which I'm aware.
Yeah, this isn't, we're not just hypothesizing a just so story here that fits our evolutionary framework. And we know this from, there's a natural experiment that emerges to test this. If you think about this, how would you know if this was true? You take identical twins who share the same genes and you raise them in completely different childhood homes. And then you track them throughout their life and you track their personality characteristics. You track how likely they are to develop these pathologies that we intuitively believe come from abuse or come from these sorts of things that we would expect to cause problems later on in life. And you find again and again and again that these twins that have the same genes, have very different environments, and that the genes are telling the story of who these children grow up to be in every way that we can measure, regardless of what sort of environment they had. So you have one twin who was raised in a very loving home with no abuse, and another one that had some degree of abuse, neglectful parents. They have a much higher ACE score, et cetera, et cetera. You check in on those kids as they get into their 20s and 30s and 40s, and the heritability of their personality characteristics starts to shine through, just like Doug is saying. So there are over 15 million of these pairs of twins that have been studied. Every single trait that you can imagine has been tested multiple times. This is incredibly robust, probably the most robust evidence that we have in social science and behavioral genetics. So this is not just our theory. We're standing on the shoulders of giants who've put this evidence together. Most notably, as Doug mentioned, Robert Plomin, whose book Blueprint we refer to very often on the podcast and elsewhere. Blueprint, I think the subtitle is How Our DNA Makes Us Who We Are, or something like that, was published in 2018, is a great primer on this topic.
Yeah, and a subtitle that is very difficult for people to grasp is it says how DNA makes us who we are, not how DNA determines our life experience.
Right.
Your life experience is different than who you are. So if you lock me into a Cuban prison, my life experience just got really bad, okay? But you didn't change who I am from that experience. So it's tricky for people to get their hand around these extraordinarily important distinctions. But with respect to the question, I hope we've answered it. Probably for most people that have not gone to the extraordinary problem of reading someone like a Plomin and actually grasping and looking at the amount of this evidence, then it would be unconvincing. And that's because the correlation is so high for people who have come from abusive situations, for example, are very often coming out of a gene pool where there's a lot of loose wires. So that person at 32 years old is having some trouble in their relationships and they're having some trouble on their job. They may be pretty smart, but they've got some emotional instability and they're on Prozac. It's like, yeah, right. They may be somewhat more problematic. They're not anything like their abusive father, but neither are they as normal and flat and boring as Sally next door who works at the library. Why? And the answer is they inherited some unstable genes, and you're watching those as that lady talks through her problems in psychotherapy with her psychodynamic analyst, who has no end of material to work with, as she talks about her father, who is a very difficult, problematic human. Okay. But the truth is, the reason that lady is struggling and the struggles that she's having now at 32 have absolutely nothing to do with her childhood. And that is not only an indictment of psychodynamic psychotherapy and learning theory in general, it is also an extraordinary challenge for people to grasp. And we're not asking you to believe it. We just simply know it's true. And we know it's true because this is one of the great questions that human beings have ever attempted to answer in all of human history. And the fact that the question actually has an answer, and that the answer is so shiningly clear and beautifully precise, is almost unbelievable. Okay, it's one of the great achievements of science, and yet it is probably the least believed and least welcome truths. And yet that truth is extremely important and useful when it comes to your own life, because it helps you realize, don't try to change your kid's personality. Don't try to change your husband's personality. Don't try to change your own personality. Okay. What we want to do is we want to create the nature of the relationships in a way that's as beneficial as possible. But trying to change who they are, you might as well bang your head against granite, because it's not moving.
If there are people like me who like to nerd out on footnotes, I was on with you, AJ, last summer. I believe we talked about this, and I had a presentation called Getting Past Your Past, why your childhood trauma doesn't define your life, or some title like that. And I wrote that in essay form on my website. So people can read the essay, and it has a bunch of footnotes that link to some of these resources and these scientific papers that back it up. So if you want to nerd out, that is there for you.
I just don't think this is the answer people want, doctors, because they have so many doctors, including the plant-based doctors, talking about the ACEs and
that's why they're
overweight. But according to Plomin, I read his book, I listened to it on Audible, and he said weight is like 70 to 80% heritable.
80%. It's the same heritability as your eye color. Just to put that in perspective for people. So the difference, the variation between two people in their weight is as determined by genes as the difference in their eye color. So just try to get your head around that. And this is profoundly heritable. But yeah, it's the entire therapeutic industrial complex that you've got a bunch of incompetent people who are sitting down with people who are having problems. And it's like, well, why am I having problems? Well, what makes sense? What can we connect to? Like, did something in your childhood happen that maybe could explain why you're struggling today? It's a model, and it's just an incorrect model, but a lot of people feel that it's intuitively correct. They did have some crap happen when they were kids. They do have some things that they can't manage to figure out in adulthood. Why not put the two together? They seem to make sense. There's plenty of books out there that confirm that that's true. It just happens to not be true.
Great. Well, guys, it's so great talking to you. Thank you so much for coming back on. We appreciate your thorough explanation of these very interesting topics.
Oh, anytime. It's always great to see you.
Thank you, Dr. Lisle. And thanks all of you for watching another episode of Chef AJ Live. Please come back tomorrow. And my guest is Dr. Tinka Barnes. The show will be 1 hour later, airing at noon Pacific time. Thanks, doctors.